I'm here to start the synopsis of Green versus Bell, third-party custody out of Washington State. This is a court record you can locate in King County Superior Court Clerk's Office. I had the hard copy in my possession at one time. I no longer have it. It was actually lost in a storage unit. Can't say they kept it either. So the hard copy is lengthy. It is heavy. I'm not sure how you, whoever you are going to get access to the court record. Hopefully it's something you can access online or in person without charge. And because I lived through this court case, I'm going to give you the synopsis based upon my memory, which I'm going to call foolproof at this time. Foolproof. Okay? I'm going to start at the beginning of the case today, but before I get to what you may see when you start the case from the beginning, I'm going to give you some background information. And in the future, the background information that I give you may correlate to the points I want used from Green versus Bell for my memoir, the book, the media project. So if not in chronological order based upon importance, these are some of the things I would like to bring up preceding Green versus Bell. Bear with me. My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer on July 25th, 2001. I was with her in the emergency room when she got the diagnosis. I believe it was at Evergreen Hospital. Segue. When I say things like I believe or I think so, these are things that are on the record. I pride myself for having a great memory. I call it the hard drive. When I'm absolutely positively not 100% sure, I may say I think or believe. That's better than me saying I don't remember. So, Evergreen Hospital emergency room. My mother was a registered nurse, an ICU nurse. Towards the end of her career, she spent full-time hours in the hospital, very, very familiar with procedures. When the radiologist came back with that look on his face and subsequent film, my mother knew she was dying and she started to cry. I was with her in that room at that time. Cancer runs in my family on my mother's side. Her mother died at 48 from the same diagnosis, lung cancer with metastasis to the brain. By coincidence, I had just come back from a short trip in LA, and I was the one that could get her to go to the hospital. For some reason, during that short time that I was gone, I believe Sade was in town, but anyway, it was July 25th is when she was diagnosed. I was in LA. Pedro could not get my mother to go to the hospital for some odd reason. As soon as I got off of the airplane, we went back to my mother's house and took her to the hospital. She was diagnosed the same day or evening I returned from California. And I went back to California for that week to say goodbye to LA. Now let me take you back 1 year. The summer of 2000, I am in Los Angeles, Long Beach actually. Let's not get it twisted. I work for Long Beach Unified School District. I was making $200 a day as a long-term sub. I had just been offered a full-time position to be a special education teacher where I would make at least $200 a day, but it would be a full-time position. I received this opportunity in 2000 prior to George Bush's No Child Left Behind nonsense, and I was able to get this opportunity with a bachelor's degree and the CBEST because teachers, I don't want to be racist or racial on this video, but I will in a month from now talking about my PTSD. They were abandoning classrooms. The class I inherited at Lindbergh Middle School was abandoned by a woman that lived in Ventura and probably didn't want to drive to Long Beach and deal with Long Beach kids. So she abandoned her magnanimous room and I inherited it. There was a need for special ed teachers. It was actually an easy thing if you're not really qualified but need to sit in there with aides and teach children at can't really learn anything. I'm not being disrespectful. I didn't feel underqualified for the position. The summer of 2000, I was finishing my last stint at Lindbergh. Whatever school was still teaching in the summer, if not Lindbergh, I must have been subbing at another school. I believe it was Lindbergh. And this is when I was offered an opportunity in the fall, and this is when Pedro Bell, my ex-stepfather, called me or intercepted a phone call I was made with my mother. He wouldn't have had to intercept it at that point. We spoke. And he asked me to come back to Woodinville and take care of my sister, my mother, his family, per usual, because he was going to leave my mother. They were going to get a divorce again. He claimed she was suicidal and crying and couldn't stop talking about her her childhood rapes. Was this true? This is a good time to insert Pedro Bell's disrespect of my mother. Was she really suicidal? Was she really crying? Was she couldn't stop talking about her rapes? I have no idea. But that's all he had to tell me for me to have a broken heart, to be overly empathetic for my mother. The bottom line is he said enough for me to ask my mother if she wanted me to return to Seattle to take care of my sister. Summer of 2000, let's get these dates right, a year before her diagnosis. My mother said, Sean, if you want to, yes. Or yes, do you want to? The answer was not no. The answer was yes with if you will. Now, I am a mama's girl to this day, almost 20 years after her burial, and I was going to do what I always did, having the little, small, close-knit, immediate family known as Mossy Green and her family. That was my family. I was going to go back there. Should she have asked me? Should Pedro have asked me? I thought it was a dire emergency. I did not return to Seattle immediately. Now we would have to check my Long Beach Unified School District employment, any other employment to confirm what I did between September and the end of 2000. By the beginning of 2001, I was detaching from stability in Los Angeles, planning to come back to Seattle area. Actually, we're going to be talking about the east side. And I did. I was back in King County, spring 2001. Okay? Pedro and my mother were not divorcing. I was in her house looking at what I called clowns under my breath, looking at these clowns try to get along, wasting my time. Why did I come back here for a pending second divorce to get resettled in King County after having more opportunity in my life as an adult in California, and I'm coming back up here to deal with your dysfunctional family, and you clowns are not even divorcing. That's how I felt. I would like my IRS statements or any way to confirm my employment to be confirmed. Spring 2001. I was already re-employed with the city of Bellevue, and I think another job, can't pinpoint it, but that's on the record. I had 2 of my former jobs. I regained them, retained them. Now I'm employed again in King County, spring 2001, a few months before my mother's diagnosis. I had actually planned to move into an apartment on 148th with a young lady who was introduced to me by a very good friend, a very good dude who's probably not going to make my book, or he may, but he has nothing to do with the tragedy known as Green versus Bell. Okay, but I either put some money down on the apartment or was supposed to put some money down on the apartment, and what preempted that was my mother's cancer diagnosis on July 25th, 2001, the same day I returned to SeaTac Airport from San Francisco. So I was in Los Angeles, and then I went to visit somebody who was in San Francisco and flew out of San Francisco Airport. All of that stuff is for you to check. Way too much information, right? Okay. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, she did two things. She started divorce proceedings against Pedro Bell for the second time. Okay, so this was after July 25th, and that dissolution, that'll tell you when she filed the paperwork. And she asked for my uncle Jail to come back to Seattle to help her. My uncle Jail, also known as Gerald Clinton, is the brother to Burl Clinton, also known as Bell. Bell ended up coming out to support my mother during her diagnosis. He was not her first choice. Uncle Jail, who had lived with us in Seattle when I was in 6th grade, shortly after my return from Milwaukee after being molested by Wilson, he came out and stayed in Seattle, and it was a very memorable experience for him. I do not believe my mother was very nice to him. He didn't stay a long time, but I believe at least a year. And that's who she wanted to come out again. Now, why did she feel the need to call for a brother, that brother, Jail, not Bell, to help her? She's dead. You would have to ask her. If I was to use my imagination, I don't know what to say except Bell was not her first choice. Bell was the one that came out. We'll talk about Bell Clinton, Burl Clinton in future uploads about Green versus Bell. Ironic. His name is Uncle Bell and Pedro's last name is Bell. So this is a good time to know the difference between that Bell and the other Bell. Okay, so those are the things that happened. So now let's go 2 years later, when my mother died, October 3rd, 2003. Somebody called Pedro Bell. He was in Florida, where he had been since the delusion, which happened in 2001. He flew the coop, left town, got lost, ended up in Florida. And somebody called him when my mother died. Now, I don't remember who called him. I don't think it was me. It might have been. I don't remember if it was Alexandria, and I'm not sure if it was Bell, but somebody called him. Prior to my mother's funeral, which was just 1 week after that, I had a conversation with Pedro Bell. Again, I am in my own apartment in Renton, Cedar Park. Lived there on a couple occasions, and the first occasion happened to be when my mother was battling cancer. I was paying rent and working to pay my own rent while my mother was battling cancer, and Uncle Bell may have been living with her or coming to visit her when he wasn't with his girlfriend, the one he had in Seattle. I digress. And but my mother always had somebody around her. I just want to emphasize the idea that when I worked, I usually had my own place and paid rent. So, and thank goodness for that. I'll explain why it's very important that I had my own place. My mother went from a middle class professional status, living on the east side, Bellevue, Woodinville type, to applying for Section 8 and getting it because she was terminally ill. She was renting a home in Kirkland when she died, and that Section 8 did not transfer to me. I don't know if it was supposed to. That would have been nice, but it didn't, and that house was not mine. Thank goodness I had my own place to live. Thank goodness I was on a lease somewhere. Back to Pedro. So we had a conversation after my mother died and before the funeral. He asked me, are we going to raise Alexandria together? Now, my answer was not a definitive yes, and it was not a definitive no. I believe I said something like, if you ... Now, that ... I am not clear what I said. I imagine I may have said something like, if you work, or if you do something else. I put a criteria to it. He didn't take that well. The day after I buried my mother, Pedro asked to, I don't know, probably not that very day, but close enough. It was arranged that the day after I buried my mother, he would see Alexandria to say goodbye to her on his way back to Florida. That was not his intentions on that day. So let's say, why do I think it was October 10th or October 11th, one of those dates, probably October 11th. Me and Alexandria met him downtown Renton, Washington, the Library Park complex right down there by the freeway. And me and Alexandria were doing pretty good spirits, considering we just buried our mother. We're getting exercise. He kidnapped Alexandria, which means that he took her away from me and proceeded to take her away from me. Pedro Bell is built like a Samoan. He is 6'3" and large. At one time, over 300 pounds. Even when he is on weight, he's built like a bouncer. So he's trying to take her away from me. I grab her. He is now dragging me on my back, where I'm holding on to Alexandria. He's dragging me on my back. I'm looking up at the sky, thinking to myself, this is like a Hollywood movie. And I am not doing very good in this scene. He eventually gets us up, or I have to get up, because he's pulling Alexandria into a getaway car. On this crime scene, there is Carlos, someone named Carlos, who's in the book because he's in the public record, and a getaway driver. His name, I have to forgive all of them. I've already forgiven him. Shame on you. So we got a big Samoan. Carlos is a bouncer and a getaway driver. That's what they needed for little old me, but I don't flatter myself. They were probably just hanging out anyway. Carlos, when I had Alexandria, I was holding on to her, asking for help, probably screaming for assistance. Carlos used a jiu-jitsu move that I would discover later. It was jiu-jitsu, and he yanked back two of my fingers, and they were sprained really, really bad. I'm trying to use my memory. I think it was on my left hand. Yeah, I think it was on my left hand. It prevented me from playing the guitar for months. And on one hand, it was such a cool move that if he wanted to, he could have snapped them off and broke my fingers. So I'm a little grateful. But he injured me. He ended up with a simple assault, or an assault 3. That excited me, because I was like, oh, you're going to get in trouble. He's not going to get in trouble. He just has to be very careful when he comes back to Seattle. And at this point, I'm sure he travels freely. So this precipitates Green versus Bell, third-party custody. Alexandria was not supposed to be taken out of state per the law, per the information in my mother's dissolution against Pedro Bell. And this precipitates it. I knew that I was going to have to go to court to fight for custody. I didn't know that it was going to start on such a tragic, traumatic note. When Alexandria was returned, about a month later, she went to the hospital to get examined, and there's a scar on her stomach. That scar came as a result from Carlo snatching my fingers off of her body. Now I want to tell you something. When Pedro was dragging us off of that basketball court, I heard my sister say, "Daddy, stop, you're hurting me." And Pedro Bell said, "No, Sean is hurting you." That's my nickname. Sean is my family nickname. Alexandria Bell has probably been told all kinds of crazy, psychotic information from a sociopath since the day she moved down there when she turned 13. Do not forget what happened to us on that basketball court. And that scar that may still be on your belly, your sister didn't do that to you. In closing, and I hope this wasn't too long for the first one, I want to explain some things to some people, and I'll attach this to this video. You might ask yourself, and you're welcome to ask me, what is the purpose of this media project? And so far I have 3 things to respond to you off of the cuff, not in chronological order. I am someone who could have, should have, would have had their PhD by now. I am your prototypical Black Studies professor at a accredited university making 6 digits a year. This is not in another lifetime. This is in this lifetime. And due to one circumstance after another and my current status, where I'm not in a PhD program, the idea of being a published author, writing at least one book, that is something that I should do to make myself feel like, you're not too old to accomplish something in your life. So I want to publish a book, okay? Not in chronological order. The second reason, this is part of my healing and recovering process. I have been diagnosed with PTSD. This is my testimony. If I can say that any part of this testimony is also for Yahusha, that's my Lord and Savior, then it's even more purposeful. I can't guarantee that this media project is going to have his name attached to it, but my testimony sure does. And lastly, the third reason, if this becomes monetarily viable, okay, which sustains my life as a 50-something-year-old woman, my mother didn't make it past 52, I would like to leave its legacy to Alexandria Bell. This is still me doing what I can to honor my mother.